Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. There was laughter in the living room as Margaret's voice came from the crowd. William, honey, can you go to the kitchen and get a bottle of wine? Her laughter was as clear as silver bells, blending in with the mingling of the guests. I looked across the room, the warm yellow light reflecting off the wedding ring on her hand, the token symbolizing our 8 years of marriage shimmering. Okay, coming right up. I walked through the bustling crowd toward the kitchen. The house is full of life, and there are familiar faces everywhere. Upstairs there was the sound of children and cousins playing and laughing, and downstairs guests were raising a glass to our love. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride that this was exactly the life I had fought so hard for, and I assumed it was everything we held dear together. Just as I was pouring a glass of wine in the kitchen, there was subtle talking coming from the hallway. It was my mother's voice, sharp and urgent. "Are you crazy? William is around. He might find out." I paused with the bottle in my hand, unsure if I'd misheard something. I moved quietly toward the door, my heart racing. Then came Margaret's laugh, very different from the one she had just used in front of her guests, cold and mocking. "Find what? What can he do? Cry foul? He's too much of a coward to stand up to anyone. Besides, he's just a walking wallet, and I don't care what that punk thinks." Those words hit me like a hammer in the pit of my stomach, and I clutched at the kitchen countertop, the bottle of wine hitting the granite countertop with a crisp clatter. "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed. "This is reckless." I didn't hear Margaret's response because I had already started to move, my steps slow and firm, each one seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds. As I turn the corner, the scene before me freezes me in place. Margaret is sitting on Oliver's lap, his arm wrapped around her waist while her fingers are absently playing with his hair. Their intimate conversation was interrupted by my sudden appearance. The air seemed to freeze and a heavy silence enveloped us. My mother's face instantly turned pale and her hand covered her mouth. "William, oh no, it's not what you think. They're just joking, it's just harmless fun," she stammered, stepping forward as if to block my view. Oliver panicked and tried to push Margaret away, but she wouldn't budge. Instead, she leaned in deeper and gave me a contemptuous smile. "Oh, don't be such a baby, punk. Yeah, we're together. What can you do?" She clasped her arms together, her tone growing colder. "If you dare think about divorce, you'll never see the kids again. Don't forget that." I felt as if an abyss had cracked in the ground beneath my feet, and my mind was filled with anger, disbelief, and sadness. How long did this betrayal last? That my mother, the one who should always be on my side, has been condoning all of this? But I didn't show any emotion, at least not yet. Oliver cleared his throat, his voice trembling. "Dude, no, it's not like that. We didn't mean to dash." "Shut up." My voice is low and firm, and he cringes, his eyes drifting to Margaret, who still looks unconcerned. "I don't need to explain anything to you." Margaret's smile became more pronounced. "Seriously, William, you should have seen this coming. You're boring, you're cowardly, you're just a dispensable person. What did you expect?" My mother took another step closer to me, her voice quivering. "William, please don't make a scene. Let's go back to the party." I turned to her, my jaw tightening. "Making a scene? That's what you're worried about? Making a scene?" My voice was rising, but I didn't care anymore. "You know about this, don't you? How long has it been going on, Mom? How long have you been covering for them?" "William, it's not like that. Don't lie to me." My voice echoed down the hallway. For the first time, I saw my mother truly fearful, her hands trembling as she tried to organize her words. Oliver stood up and held up his hands as if trying to de-escalate the situation. "William, look, I didn't mean it." "Okay, we didn't mean to hurt you. Not on purpose." I interrupted and took a step forward. "Like an accident?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You're my best friend, Oliver. You should be supporting me, not stabbing me in the back." He lowered his head, unable to look me in the eye. Margaret rolled her eyes, visibly impatient with this conversation. "Come on, stop playing the victim. William, you're acting like I'm the bad guy, but maybe if you weren't so useless, I wouldn't have to find someone else." I stared at her, my expression calm and icy. "Have you said enough?" I finally spoke, my voice smooth. I turned toward the kitchen, my steps slow and firm. I can hear Margaret shouting mockingly behind me. What, are you going to go sniveling now? Running away as usual? I ignored her and focused on what I was going to do next. In the kitchen, I took our marriage certificate out of the drawer and examined it for a long time. This piece of paper represents everything we've built together, the promises we've made. Then, without hesitation, I tore it in half. The sound of ripping brought me an almost morbid sense of satisfaction. When I returned to the hallway, they were still standing in place, as if under a spell. I took off my wedding ring and threw it at Margaret's feet. Congratulations, I said, sarcasm in my voice. You guys were made for each other. With that, I left the house, Margaret's protests fading behind me. For the first time in years, I felt a strange clarity. My world may have fallen apart, but I won't let them destroy me. A storm is coming, and I'm going to make sure I'm prepared. The next few days, I threw myself into an elaborate plan of revenge. It was clear to me that to truly defeat Margaret, I would have to be calmer and more circumspect than she was. I began quietly gathering evidence, like a silent detective, recording every detail. Adultery is hard to forensically prove, Attorney Jennifer said during our first meeting, her eyes sharp and focused. But since you walked in on them on the spot, along with the other evidence, we've got a good break. Don't worry about the baby. We'll make sure she can't use it to blackmail you. This gives me great confidence. I used my spare cell phone to start collecting evidence and digging for clues that I had overlooked. Bank statements revealed questionable expenses, fancy restaurant purchases I never knew existed, hotel reservations that didn't match our family's travel dates, and those sudden increases in overtime expenses. The telltale signs were more obvious on social media. The pictures of Margaret and Oliver together when I wasn't there, the way they looked at each other and smiled, the ambiguous comments and likes. All of this is piecing together a truth that I once deliberately ignored. We need to gather as much evidence as we can, Jennifer advised. Every text message, every photo, every questionable expense could be key. We need to make it impossible for her to deny it all. In the meantime, I remained outwardly calm. Every morning, I could see that contemptuous look in Margaret's eyes, as if she were laughing at my weakness. But what she doesn't realize is that every moment she thinks I'm showing weakness, I'm preparing for the final counterattack. One evening, while organizing evidence in my study, I found a picture from last Christmas. We looked so happy in the picture, Margaret leaning on my shoulder, Oliver standing by with what I now see as an extremely fake smile on his face. This photo, once a testament to fond memories, is now clear evidence of betrayal. You've been in your study too long, Margaret pushed in, sarcasm in her tone. Worrying about work again? I calmly closed my laptop. Yes, there are some important things to take care of. She took a few steps closer and leaned against the desk. Seriously, William, when are you going to learn to relax a little? It's no wonder I get bored when I lock myself in here all day. There was a knife hidden in her words, but I just smiled. You're right, Margaret. Maybe I do need a change. She seemed confused by my reaction, but quickly returned to that condescending expression, whatever. By the way, Oliver's coming over for dinner tomorrow. He said he has some work stuff to discuss with you. I nodded. Yeah, it's just as well I have some things to talk to him about. After she left, I opened my phone and sent Jennifer a message. The evidence is almost gathered. It's time to prepare for the final step. The next day, I made it a point to get home early. Margaret was preparing dinner in the kitchen and was visibly surprised to see me back. Why are you so early today? Work's over, I said, and I want to do something to prepare for Oliver's arrival. Her expression flustered for a moment, but she quickly masked it. Oh, what preparations? I walked over to the wine cooler and took out a bottle of red wine of a good vintage. Since it's a special dinner, of course it's going to go with a special wine. Margaret stared at me for a moment, as if trying to read something into my calm expression, but ultimately said nothing. I could feel her unease growing, but it was exactly the effect I wanted. Before dinner, I received a confirmation message from Jennifer. All the paperwork is ready to go. I deleted the message, and an inexplicable calm came over me. It's not anger. It's not hatred. It's a calm resolve. Oliver arrived right on time, flashing that fake smile as usual. "Hey man, how's it going?" "It's good," I said, pouring him a glass of wine. "Better than ever, actually." We sat at the dinner table and talked about work and life as if nothing had happened. Margaret stole glances at me from time to time, as if speculating on my thoughts. Oliver, on the other hand, looked a little uncomfortable, probably because I was unusually calm. "So," I spoke up near the end of dinner, "are you guys ready?" Margaret and Oliver exchange a confused look. "Ready for what?" Margaret asked, a hint of caution in her voice. I put my glass down and looked straight at them. "Ready to face the storm? Because it's coming soon." Watching the smiles freeze on their faces, I knew that it was time. A storm is coming, and I'm all set. The air in the living room was so heavy it was almost suffocating, filled with unspoken words and panic about to erupt. I made a point of inviting Margaret, Oliver, my mother, and all my family and friends to the house under the pretext of discussing future plans. None of them knew exactly what I had prepared. Margaret sat gracefully on the couch, legs folded, sipping absently at her red wine. Oliver, on the other hand, sat in his armchair, his usual strutting expression replaced by a deliberate calm. My mother sat on the edge of the other couch, wringing her hands restlessly, obviously sensing something was wrong. I stood by the television, remote control in hand, and looked around the room at everyone. Clearing my throat, I signaled for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming today." I spoke, keeping my tone calm. "I think it's time to have an honest conversation about recent events." Margaret cocked her head slightly, the corners of her mouth quirking into a contemptuous smile. "Is this really necessary, William? Can't we just drop these childish antics of yours lately?" I ignored her words and turned to Oliver. "Oliver, before we get started, is there anything you want to say?" Oliver shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his old confidence gone. William, I'm not quite sure what this is about, but—" "Oh, I think you know very well what this is about." I interrupted him, my tone suddenly sharp. My mother interjected with a plea in her voice. "William, let's not make a big deal out of this. We're family. We can talk?" I turned to her, my expression cold. "Family? That's interesting, Mom. Let's see what family means to you." With that, I lifted the remote and pressed play. The first video begins to play. That's what the security camera installed in the house captured. While I was at work, Margaret and Oliver were talking, laughing, and acting close in the kitchen. Oliver's hand was on Margaret's waist, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle like a teenager. The kind of smile that used to be just mine. The room was silent, except for the subtle sound of the television. The glass in Margaret's hand slipped and shattered on the hardwood floor, her face turning pale as she opened her mouth to say something but couldn't make a sound. Oliver leaned forward, a mixture of panic and anger on his face. "William, it's not what you think." "Save it," I snapped, my voice colder than I thought it would be. "You're not even worth the effort of explaining." I pressed the remote again and switched to the next set of evidence. A series of screenshots of text messages appeared on the screen. Flirty conversations between Margaret and Oliver, flirting and jeering behind my back. A message from Oliver: "He'll never find out. He's too trusting, too soft." The other was Margaret's reply: "He wouldn't dare do anything even if he found out. He just doesn't have the guts." I clenched my fists, my voice shaking slightly with suppressed anger as I read out the information. Margaret finally found her voice. "William, I can explain." "Shut up." I interrupted her. "We're not done." The last video started to play. It was from the anniversary party. The camera captured everything in full. The way Margaret sat on Oliver's lap, the way my mother tried to cover it up, and the moment when I walked in and ran into it all. Oliver buried his face in his palms and kept mumbling, "Oh God, no." Margaret lurched to her feet, desperation in her voice. "William, please, it's not what you think." I wasn't thinking clearly. It was just a mistake. I let out a sneer. "Mistake? How long did this last, Margaret? Months? A couple years? Don't insult my intelligence by saying it was just a mistake." She came to me with tears in her eyes. "We can fix this, William. Think about the kids. We can go to counseling. We can—" "Think about the kids?" I interrupted her. my smile turning sarcastic. You mean those children you threatened to take away from me? Those children you used as blackmail against me? Don't worry, Margaret. I've already spoken to the judge. Good luck explaining your unchaste behavior to the court. Her face fell instantly. I turned to my mother, who had remained silent, and my voice was cold and firm. And you, I said, you knew. You always knew, didn't you? She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand to stop her. Don't bother explaining. I have the text message you sent to Margaret. You warned her about me finding out, told her to be more careful. You weren't protecting me, you were protecting them. Tears streamed down her mother's cheeks as she tried to explain. I thought I was doing the right thing, William. I didn't want to see our family fall apart. Our family was broken the moment you chose to harbor them. I snapped, taking a step back. You betrayed me no less than they did. Her voice trembled as she reached out and tried to grab my hand. William, I'm your mother. That's the most heartbreaking part. I drew back my hand. You were supposed to be the one on my side, but you chose them. The room was thrown into chaos. Margaret is sobbing, trying to defend herself, while Oliver is frozen in place like a statue, pale and disoriented. My mother continued to cry, mumbling words of apology over and over, but they fell on my ears as meaningless. I stood there and watched it all with a strange sense of transcendence. For the first time in weeks, I felt an extraordinary inner peace, like a heavy burden had finally been lifted. Here's the thing. My voice pierced through the chaotic air like a sharp knife. Margaret, I'm going to file for divorce. I have enough evidence to make sure you get nothing. Not the house, not the kids, nothing. She looked up, a flash of panic in her eyes. You can't do this, William. Please, don't take the children away from me. I didn't take them, I said coldly. It was you who gave them up when you put your selfish desires above their happiness. Turning to Oliver, as for you, stay out of my sight. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead. Oliver opens his mouth to say something, but quickly closes it after seeing the look in my eyes. Finally, I look to my mother. And you? Don't expect me to forgive you anytime soon, maybe ever. Her sobbing got louder, but I remained impassive. I walked to the door and opened it. This conversation is over. Please leave my house. Margaret hesitated, tears running down her cheeks. William, please, get out, I said firmly. One by one they left until I was standing alone in an empty house. I stood in the doorway and watched their silhouettes disappear at the end of the driveway. For the first time in weeks, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt before. The chains of betrayal have been broken. The storm has passed. But for them, it is only the beginning. The days following the conflict were not quiet. A storm swept through everyone's lives. But this time I was firmly in control, directing that storm towards those who had hurt me. The first blow came from the divorce proceedings. Margaret had always thought she held all the leverage, but she clearly underestimated the completeness of my preparation. My attorney, Jennifer, was a sharp professional who laid out the evidence piece by piece like a prosecutor. Infidelity, emotional abuse, threats of custody loss. This isn't just a run-of-the-mill divorce case, William, she said in one meeting. It's a complete reckoning. She's not going to get any compensation, let alone custody of her children. Hearing those words, I felt my inner resolve strengthen. For years, I played that Mr. Nice Guy role of constant compromise and sacrifice for peace. But now, I'm no longer that victim. The courtroom scenes are memorable, with Margaret looking contrite as her attorney tries to weave a story of a dutiful mother who made a single mistake. During a recess, she cut me off in the hallway. William, she whispered, please, don't make this so ugly. Think of the children, and we can settle privately. I looked at her with a blank expression. Reconciliation? Why didn't you think about the kids when you were with Oliver? Why do you want me to believe you actually care about them now? She scowled for a moment, but quickly regained her sharpness. If you take things too far, it's the children who will be hurt, not me. I leaned in slightly, my voice low and firm. The kids will be fine. It's you that's about to lose everything. Back in court, Jennifer shows the irrefutable evidence. Text message logs, surveillance videos, and Margaret's threats. With each new piece of evidence presented, the judge's expression grew harsher. The final judgment came both fast and hard. I was awarded full custody of the children, and Margaret's visitation rights were limited to supervised visits. She won't be getting any alimony, and her attempts to blackmail me with the kids are a bust. Oliver's downfall was equally miserable. His wife Michelle has always been a gentle and unassuming woman, but when I sent her the evidence, a certain string broke inside her. "William," she said over the phone, her voice shaking with anger and heartbreak, "thank you for telling me this. I never knew, but I'm going to make him pay." She does what she says she's going to do. Michelle filed for divorce almost immediately, and with the evidence of infidelity, she completely crushed Oliver financially. He lost his house, his car, and even his job after Michelle reported his misconduct to Human Resources. Oliver called me one day with desperation in his voice. "Dude, I know I fucked up, but can we talk? I need help." "Help?" I interrupt him, sarcasm dripping from my voice. "Like you helped me by destroying my family? Stop calling, Oliver. You chose this path for yourself. Lay on it." When I finished, I hung up the phone, a sense of fulfillment welling up inside me. A mother's breakdown is much more personal. Her betrayal hurts me the most, and I want to make sure she understands the gravity of her actions. When the rest of the family learns the truth, her situation at family gatherings becomes incredibly awkward, filled with icy silences and subtle taunts that remind her of her role in the disaster. One night she showed up on my doorstep, her face covered in tears of remorse. "William, please," she cried. "I made a mistake. I thought I was protecting you." "You're not protecting me," I interrupted, my voice icy. "You're protecting her. In the process, you betrayed your own son. I don't know how I'm going to make up for this anymore." She sobbed. I shook my head. "Maybe you can't make it up." I didn't slam the door in her face, but I didn't invite her in either. That night she left with the burden of her choice. In the midst of all this storm, my attention turned to the kids. They became my anchor in the midst of chaos, and their innocence and resilience reminded me of what really matters. I threw myself into the role of being a good father, attending school events, tutoring homework, and making sure they felt loved and safe despite the drastic changes in their lives. It's not easy, and loneliness can creep in on nights when the house seems extra quiet after the kids have gone to bed. But I remind myself that it's only temporary, and it's a price worth paying for a life of peace and stability. I met Emma at one of my daughter's parent-teacher conferences. She was the art teacher, gentle and soft-spoken, with a warmth that immediately drew me in. We initially talked about the kids and how they were doing in school, but soon our conversation extended to deeper topics. Emma is empathetic, never quick to interrupt or judge, and always listens patiently. One night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself pouring everything out to her. My failed marriage, the betrayal, and all that came with it. "William," she whispered, holding my hand tenderly, "you've been through so much, but look at everything you've built. Your kids are amazing, and you're stronger than you realize." For the first time in years, I felt hope, not just for myself, but for the possibility of loving again. Emma came naturally into our lives and fit perfectly into this little family. My kids love her too, and I find myself falling deeper in love with her every day. She showed me what a true partnership is, one built on trust, respect, and mutual support. One evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma turned to me and said, "You deserve to be happy, William. Don't ever doubt that." I smiled and pulled her closer. "I think I finally found it." The golden rays of the setting sun spilled onto the grass in the backyard as I leaned against the wooden railing and watched the children chase and play on the freshly mowed lawn, their laughter filling the yard. Emma stood beside me, her gentle smile completing the moment. "Dinner's almost ready," she nudged me with her elbow, although it might be a little burnt. I glanced at her and couldn't help but smile. "So you're saying you almost burned your dinner, and now you're imploring me to bake, is that it?" Emma cracked a smile and patted my arm. "Okay, I admit it. But hey, I at least marinated the meat, so that's a credit, right?" I kissed her cheek. Of course it counts. Watching her walk towards the grill to prepare her food, I couldn't help but marvel at the changes life has brought. Life is now peaceful and full, filled with genuine love and trust. But the scars of the past remain. They are faint marks of all that I have been through. After the divorce was finalized, I started over for the sake of the kids, moved to a new city, started my own company, and focused on being a competent father. At first, it was just a matter of surviving and trying not to let the bitterness inside consume you. Emma's presence was like a gentle breeze, both unexpected and delightful. We met at a charity auction, an event I attended on a whim. She was the organizer of the auction, her hair a little disheveled, her writing pad littered with various sticky notes. When I tried to leave early, she pulled me into a bidding war for a painting I didn't even like. "You can't leave without contributing," she said, a determined glint in her eye. "I just went out to get some air," I lied, trying to avoid her gaze. "Yes?" She gave a meaningful smile. "So how much are you going to donate for this breath of fresh air? How about starting with 500? Her confidence made me smile, and I ended up staying until the end of the event that night. That painting now hangs in our living room and reminds me every day of the beginning of a new life. Meanwhile, Margaret and Oliver's lives have gone in directions I barely recognize. Margaret tries to maintain her decency for a while, but her reputation eventually destroys her. Rumors about her extramarital affairs spread around, and people began to turn away from her. She lost her social circle, her job, and most painfully, the respect of her own children. I met her outside the courthouse one day after another custody hearing. She looked exhausted, her once polished appearance having been replaced by a haggard look. "William," she said hesitantly, holding a stack of papers in her hand, "can we talk?" I held my arms at arm's length, keeping my distance from her. "What's up, Margaret?" She sighed, her gaze lowered. "I just wanted to say that I'm glad the kids have you. They need stability, and I can't give them that right now." I gazed at her, trying to find the anger that would have welled up at the sight of her in days gone by, but found myself left with nothing but pity. "They'll always have me," I said simply, "and I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, unshed tears in her eyes. That was the last real conversation we had, and she came and went in our lives after that, but never stayed long enough to fix what she had broken. Oliver's collapse was even more complete. After losing his family and his job, he tries to reach out to mutual friends for help, but loyalty doesn't come easily when you've burned all your bridges. I knew from hearsay that he had moved out of state, chasing a new beginning that would never materialize. "Daddy, look at me." The sound of my son's voice brought me back to reality. He was trying to do a somersault, which looked more like a tumble, but his enthusiasm made me smile. "Great little guy." I yelled, "Keep practicing." Emma returned to me, a glass of iced tea in her hand. "They grow up so fast," she whispered. I nodded, feeling both proud and sentimental. "Yeah, but I was lucky enough to witness it." She rested her head on my shoulder, and we just stood there in silence, soaking in the serenity of the moment. Later in the evening, when the kids were asleep, Emma and I sat on the couch looking through old photo albums. One photo stopped us in our tracks. It was taken at a park shortly after the divorce, and it showed me with a forced smile and tired eyes, but the children's smiles were genuine. "You've come a long way," Emma said, her fingers brushing over the photo. "We both are," I corrected, pulling her closer. "I couldn't have gotten this far without you." She smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. "I didn't do anything special. You just needed someone to remind you of who you are." She's right. I once spent so long defining myself by failure and betrayal that I forgot my worth. It wasn't until I really let go of the past that real healing began. Occasionally, I still hear about Margaret and Oliver, but those already seem like echoes of another life. Regret consumed them both, but that was no longer a burden I needed to carry. I realized that justice is not about revenge, but about regaining control of your life. By focusing on my children, my new marriage, and my own happiness, I found a peace that no amount of revenge could bring. As the night wore on and Emma fell asleep on my shoulder, I looked out the window at the stars and thought, the scars of the past will always be there. They are a testament to everything I have been through, but they no longer define me. In the end, I realized that the best revenge is not to watch Margaret and Oliver suffer, but to live lives so full and happy that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Sitting there, listening to the calming sounds of my home, I knew I had won. It's not because I destroyed their lives, but because I rebuilt my own. a new life filled with love, trust, and hope. Looking at sleeping Emma and thinking of the children sleeping peacefully upstairs, I felt a sense of inner peace. All that anger and pain that used to torment me has now been transformed into anticipation for the future. This is true victory, not to push others into the abyss, but to allow oneself to climb to the summit and find true happiness there. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.